This is ABC Radio Brisbane with Rebecca Livingston.
Just about anywhere you look around Brisbane, if you see a sculpture, it is likely to be the work of Dr Rhyl Hinwood. She hails from Brisbane's western suburbs. She's designed a whopping 700 commissioned artworks in her time. You will see her work at the University of Queensland, Roma Street Parklands, Queen's Park, at St John's Cathedral. As you walk in, if you look up, it's an extraordinary contribution. And now Ryl's story and her remarkable talent is being shared with the country in a new ABC documentary. It's called Rhyl Hinwood, A Legacy in Stone. Rhyl, good morning.
Good morning, Rebecca.
And what a thrill to have you in studio this morning. Thank you so much for being here.
My pleasure.
How did you learn your trade?
Well, it's not really a trade. I'm not a stone mason. I don't build buildings. I'm an artist. So I went to art school at night, and down at the Central Technical College it was called then, where QUT is now. And but I just did all the subjects that I liked to do, because in that era, many of us of my era, our parents said, just, you're going to be a wife and a mother, and so just become a secretary or a nurse or something like that, so that you don't need a career, because you're going to be in the home caring for your family. So I just did drawing and painting. But then I heard about a sculpture class, and that really interested me, and I went for 1 year when a French sculptor came to Brisbane. His name was Georges Verine, and he taught many of the sculptors who are still around in Brisbane today, although George lived well into his 80s and kept on running classes. But his legacy really has shown in the foundation days of the Society of Sculptors, as well as Len and Kath Shillham, who were very influential and very most well known in Queensland for their wonderful artworks.
And now their teachings, their legacy is carried on in the legacy that you have provided around the city. Mm-hmm. Do you recall the first sort of significant piece of art that you were commissioned to do?
Yes, well, I suppose I'd say it was a stone carving that was in an exhibition in King George Square. We were very imaginative and adventurous. I think the early Society of Sculptors just thought it would be a wonderful place to showcase sculpture. We should have more of it. And 1970, the Society received permission to have an exhibition for about a month or so in King George Square. And it was a great showcase for us, and we continued on for a couple more years to have exhibitions in King George Square. And I made this big stone carving from a block that came from the demolition of the Victoria Bridge. So I always called it Victoria, because I carved a female figure. But I didn't learn to carve down at the college. I learned by watching Len Shillham for one day demonstrate how to use the tools and how to carve stone. So I went away and bought a Bricky's mallet from the hardware, and I bought a chisel with a scotch claw in it, and all at the hardware. And I bought a couple of chisels too, a point and a flat chisel from Len Shillham, and I taught myself.
Wow!
So, yeah, I hit my thumb so many times until it was bleeding, but I was so enthusiastic I just sort of kept going. But when I started, when Len showed a group of us how you carve stone, I was 8 months pregnant, so I didn't get much done for a while.
Real? Wow. Okay, because, yeah, it's pretty hard to get up close and personal with your subject when you have a big belly in front of you. Yeah. So were you considered quite sort of unique or radical at the time?
No, there were quite a lot of stone carvers in those days, but not many of them around today. I think Well, even at my stage of life now, I'm thinking it's too hot, it's too hard. I think I'll do something a bit more gentle.
Can I see your thumbs? I just want to see what kind of nick they're in today.
They're not too bad.
They've hung in there.
Not too bad.
Wow.
My mother would say, darling, take up some watercolours, do something more gentle. But the sculpture just is the thing that grabbed me. So I'm using clay more these days and having artworks cast in bronze here in Brisbane.
You are listening to Dr. Rhyl Hinwood, a sculptor. She has been commissioned to do 700 artworks in her time. Many of the sculptures, gosh, I keep switching those words up, you see around Brisbane, whether you're at the University of Queensland or Roma Street Parklands, Queen's Park. Do you tend to sculpt the same sort of figures, or is it a variety?
No, I don't always carve figures. I won a commission at the University of Queensland in 1976 to complete the carvings in the Great Court of the university. And it already had a great deal of carving around the cloisters and on the buildings. And the previous sculptor was a Dresden-born gentleman, and he was called John Theodore Muller. And he'd done some wonderful grotesques as well as a lot of other things. But
wonderful
grotesques. They are not gargoyles. They are not functional water spouts.
Yeah.
They are purely decorative, comical faces, caricatures. And I was commissioned initially to carve 8 portraits of people who'd contributed to the foundation of the university. But I never produced any drawings or models of what I was going to do. They just left it to me, which was wonderful to have that freedom and, give them a surprise when the work was delivered, and they never sent them back.
They must have liked them. So they were sort of physically accurate faces of those people in sandstone?
Yeah, yes. Well, it is called Helidon freestone. It is a sandstone, but it's the finest quality in Australia. And so to just call it sandstone, you're downgrading it to the basic level of all the others. We have freestone, and it's very beautiful and comes in many colours and many degrees of hardness, I suppose. But the university is created in a big variety of colours, which looks very attractive to visitors, and fairly rare to have that variation in the structure of the buildings.
Rhyl, how hard is it to chisel down to some of the finer details of a person's face, the shape of a nose or, the crease at an eye?
Well, you just tap away very gently. That would be with great care, because if you really, a lot of people say, what happens if you knock the nose off at the last minute? But really, if you do that, you're not really paying attention, because you learn very quickly that it's important to drive the chisel inwards towards the body of the form that you're creating, rather than away from it, like you wouldn't carve down to the point of the nose, because for sure the nose will fall off. And then you just have to carve another face smaller out of the same piece of stone. You'd have to scale the whole thing down, so best not to do it in the first place.
Rhyl, what's the largest or most challenging piece you've ever worked on?
Well, probably the work that I've just completed at St John's Anglican Cathedral. It was a commission to create, or to design actually, and create 13 statues for the West End on the exterior of the building. They were the 13 statues contain 24 individual characters from the story of Jesus, and it's quite a unique approach. I've tried to incorporate events that were happening at the time that I'm carving them, although that story, of course, was a couple of thousand years ago. But I've even included the transit of Venus in relation there, because at the time the carvings were happening, it was when the transit of Venus was viewable in Australia.
Oh, wow.
And it was at that time that's the event that brought Captain Cook across the world and across the Pacific to be here to observe the transit of Venus. That's what brought him to the South Seas.
So you've incorporated that and into 13 individual statues. Each one looks to be, what, about a metre? A metre and a half?
They're as big as me. I'm a bit taller than a metre.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. And extraordinary detail. What kind of material were you working with there?
Well, that's the Helidon freestone,
That's the same one, right.
as the university has. Yes.
How long did that project take you? Because, and we should say, those statues at St John's Cathedral, so you've done them as individually, and then they've been lifted up and inserted along the front of the church.
Yes, yes.
How long did it take you to do all of those?
Well, I was working on other jobs as well at the same time, because if it's pouring rain or if it's very windy, it's not a good place to be, or out in the blazing sun. I've had to choose the periods of time when it was most comfortable to carve stone outside at my studio at home. But I really produced about 3 a year. One year I did 4.
Okay.
And as they were completed, we delivered them into the cathedral, and they were placed in the nave so that visitors for several months could get up close and personal with them and see all the details. And it really enjoyed having them right there before. Once there were 3 together, then it's very expensive to put up scaffolding and get the men to deal with the crane and everything else that has to be there on the day of an installation. So the men could put up 3 in one day. They'd erect the scaffolding first thing in the morning, bring the artworks out onto the front steps where there would be a ceremony. The Archbishop and the Dean would bless the work, and then we would all clap, and then they were raised up by a crane up onto the deck of the scaffolding and put in place.
Oh my goodness, I can only imagine your heart rate as your work is being lifted and set in place. For you, Rhyl, I mean, your mark, your legacy is all over this city. How do you feel knowing that your work will be part of the design of this city potentially forever?
Well, one never knows, does one? Because Cromwell, I mean, hundreds of years ago, Cromwell lassoed all the statuary from the west end of many cathedrals in Brisbane and hoisted them off the pedestals and smashed them on the ground. So I hope I'm not putting ideas in anyone's head, but these are well pinned in place. They are not only mortared in place, but they have a big stainless steel pin down into the pedestal and up into the statue, so they're not going to fall off easily.
Anytime soon, no doubt. Potentially there are a lot of people listening who have seen your work around the place and don't necessarily know your story. They will know it if they watch a documentary about you that's airing on Sunday night. How did you feel talking about your life and your contribution?
Well, it's really nice to tell people the story. They're always very interested, and I'm often asked to be guest speaker at Probus clubs, etc., etc. But I really have to not get too involved with all that social side, because there's always other commissions to work on, and thankfully I still have some very interesting commissions happening in the studio.
So you're not slowing down?
No, why should I?
I don't think you should at all.
Artists never stop. Artists never stop. No, there's always, the imagination is always ticking over, but perhaps one day I might take up watercolours again, like my mother suggested.
Oh, I don't know. I think you can keep shunning your mum's advice. You've done just fine. So what are you working on at the moment?
I'm making a life-size statue that will be cast in bronze, and the subject is Selene, the Greek goddess of the moon. So it's something lyrical and beautiful, and I've got free rein as more or less of how she will look and stand and whatever, and I'm quite enjoying creating her.
Where will she end up?
At a private home, in a very beautiful garden overlooking the city. So she's a very lucky girl.
Yeah.
Yes.
What about your own home? Is it full of your art?
Yes. There's not a lot of pieces, mainly portraits of all my family from when the grandchildren were really small, and then one of my mother and my husband and my children, my grandchildren. They're all on top of one of the cupboards in the living room, so we can enjoy them. I only have a few pieces at home, but the probably the one that people most notice is a larger than life-size marble carving. It was about my first marble carving of my daughter, who was with Queensland Ballet at the time, and she posed for me one night, and I took a few photos of her, and then she dashed back to Sydney, where she had gone to work with Sydney Dance Company, and so I modelled it up without her being there, and I remember my husband looking at it and saying, "Looks like Sculptor's hand up there." So I had to get up and sort of, with a riffler, and, when I looked at it, I thought, yeah, it's not delicate enough, is it? But she has my feet as well, so I'd take my shoe off, and because she's standing, it's a very vertical piece, and I'd take my shoe off every now and then, look at how my feet were, when they were posed, how they went, so that I could carry on with the carving.
It's handy when you have a limb that's similar to the subject of the artwork.
Yes.
So it's larger than life size. It's your daughter in a ballet pose. It's larger than life, and that's in your home.
Yes, she's in a body-hugging leotard with one hand above her head, and she's standing up on, not tiptoes, but yes, very vertical piece it is. So it's in my front courtyard. A lot of people trickle by slowly looking in at her.
Yeah. How wonderful. What an extraordinary contribution that continues today. Rhyl, it is such a thrill to meet you and know the person behind so many of the sculptures around Brisbane City and beyond. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. I listen to you all the time, especially when I'm out in the car.
Oh,
it's always even there, and now I know how to spell your name.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rhyl. Dr. Rhyl Hinwood.
This is ABC Radio Brisbane with Rebecca Livingston.